Our world is lost in unnecessary fear and hurt. Our systems seem scientifically engineered to make you small, powerless, and always waiting for the next great leader who will fix the problems around us. Worse, we're witnessing neighbor versus neighbor while warfare breaks out around our family tables. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Hey everybody, Bill Protzman, I'm your moderator. In a moment we're going to talk about the Israel-Palestine situation. But before we get to that, we're assisted in our work here by the Zero Aggression Project. For each new episode, they publish the most detailed description of the program, along with multiple ways for you to watch and listen. All the episodes of Gracearchy with Jim Babka are collected at the blog zeroaggressionproject.org. We want you to please go to zeroaggressionproject.org and subscribe to the email newsletter right now, so you won't miss an episode. And more importantly, right now, you're consuming the show on your preferred platform, streamer, video, audio. Please click the button to subscribe right here as well. By doing so, you'll have an instant effect on the algorithmic reach of this show. In plain English, as you subscribe on this platform, you will expose Gracearchy to additional listeners. All right, Jim, the biggest story of the last half year is the war in Gaza. And if I can be blunt, it seems odd that a show about grace has left this topic untouched for so long.
It is. And I've been keenly bothered about this. I've been prayerfully trying to consider what it is I need to say about this. And one of the things I come away with, Bill, I've mentioned this to you and a couple other friends in private, is that I felt two things. One, small. This story's so big, so ancient, has so many twists and turns and details to it, that the likelihood that I would step in a turd here in trying to explain my views on it, trying to shape policy in it, is high. That the odds are just staggeringly high that I would say something wrong, that I would put the foot in the wrong place. And so I didn't want to do that. And I felt like a lot of research was needed in order to do that. And second, I noticed the sensitivity that surrounds this issue. I have had the opportunity in my day job to talk to a series of people in the Detroit, Dearborn, Michigan area. We have a project that we're doing up there, and the handful of people I've talked to up there have a different take from the regime media perspective. And then I have friends, several of them whom are Jewish, who have also shared with me their perspective or take on this issue. And I just come away feeling affection for people and wanting to be cautious in what it is that I did. And so I didn't want to step or speak too soon. And I feel, Bill, honestly, I feel a little bad about that. I don't want to say it's guilt, but what I wanted to speak sooner, but I decided to wait. I decided that the thing to do here was to wait until I could say some things about which I was confident, almost to the point of being sure. I just didn't want to rush into this.
You know, for the audience, Jim has made some predictions in the past that have been spot on. And I want to be clear right up front that this episode is not about any predictions. It's very difficult for me, too, to take a position on this, Jim. And a position is the last thing I think that the world needs from Gracearchy right now. We need to offer
everything we do on this show, we're looking to do something unique. I watch a lot of back and forth debate and different perspectives, mostly on YouTube, but I consume a lot of information. I read, and one of the things I find, particularly in the YouTube environment, is there's an echo chamber, and Yeah, and we've talked about this, and we'll talk about it some more. We're not going to stop talking about the media because it's a very big social. It engineers us socially as a culture in a lot of ways. It programs human beings.
Yeah.
And I find that distasteful and not helpful, and most of the time anti-gracious. The conflict machine gets us at each other's throats. That's what it does. And so what we try to do here is try to reveal, pull the mask off of things, an apocalypse, as it were, so that people understand what's happening behind the curtain, or they see the mechanism that's underneath the machine that's behind everything, to try to expose those factors so that people have a more profound sense of what it is that they're consuming. So if you listen or watch Gracearchy, you're getting a course, a free course as of now, a free course in how to consume media, how to go about discerning truth, not the details of the debate. Although I've gotten into those in many cases to illustrate my point, or to make helpful predictions about the future, or to actually apply grace to a given situation. Here, I want to tread slightly different. And I come away with three things.
Yeah. I love the way that you set these up, because you said you are convinced of three things. And I think conviction is really where the conversation begins, doesn't it?
For me, it's when I'm finally able to speak.
Yeah.
In October, when the Hamas attack happened, these three things were not in my pocket. I mean, they might have been there, but it was like lost. Like I hadn't quite. They weren't conscious. Let's put it that way.
Right. It was still like bubbling up.
Yeah, and it took time to get to the point where I could say the things I'm going to say today. If for people who have consumed more than half of the episodes that we've done, I'm doubtful that it'll be very surprising to you what I say. But for the people who are clicking this link for the first time because they're turned on by the words Israel or Palestine, then you may be in for a surprise. So I think there are three things that I'm basically sure about in this conflict.
Okay.
All right. Here's number one. And it might be, wow. I don't know. I don't know which one of these things is going to be the most shocking to people. Number one, they are not fighting over land.
I'm with you on that. I mean, even though the original distribution of the land goes back, it's biblical, right?
Yes.
Today's fight is not about that.
Well, when people get caught up in the fever of war, when someone has decided that someone else is their enemy, other things begin to accrue. And we see this in our own politics. We just completed an episode with Jerry Bowyer where we talked about, people wanting to taste the delicious tears of their political enemies.
Yeah.
The mere anguish of the other side can, in some cases, be satisfying. The ability to inflict damage and pain. Land is an abstraction. In this particular case, it is a way to rationalize or justify the actions that each side takes. But it's not the real cause of the dispute. And to completely explain what I mean, I got to get the second thing in too.
Right. I can see where you're going here.
And that is on neither side did the individual persons, okay? I'm talking about regular human beings. I'm not talking about masses and collectives of people. In fact, let's just be clear. A mass of people doesn't believe anything. Individuals do. Okay? The individual persons on both sides, it's true. This is what I'm about to say. Neither side, there's not an exception to this. Neither side, the individual persons, did they originate those desires autonomously? In other words, they didn't wake up in the morning and said, how my life would be better right now is if we and my people had more land. That's not the case for any individual human being in this mix. And what I mean by that is that inside and of themselves, they didn't derive this desire or the belief that they would be happier, that their life would flourish if their side had more land. That did not happen. Desires come to us from others. We catch them. In this case, they may have been handed down. And so it's interesting that one of the very first things you did as you were questioning me is you talked about how old this story was, and that there was, maybe some lines even drawn as far back as biblical times. And that's a story that someone tells and passes on mimetically so that desire can be shared. It's shared in the narrative. And so
yes, it becomes part of the mythology. Oh, perhaps the wrong word, the legend.
Oh no, I'm fine with mythology in this case. I really am. It is the mythology. It's that if other people would die and get out of my way, my people would be happier.
Right. Echoes of that happening right now in the American Civil Rights Movement, and you can hear that same kind, that archetype. I guess you can hear that archetype around the world, the Uyghurs in China, and anybody who is coming from a place where they're feeling boxed in and oppressed can relate to that mythology.
Yeah. So the thing is that people can get caught up in arguments where they try to figure out on like a ledger who's more wrong and who's more right.
Right. Right.
And that all that stuff is surface. And one way I could illustrate this is we're just coming back. People don't know this as we're talking here. Between our last episode and this, we haven't been in the studio for 3 weeks. I had, amongst other things, a home improvement project I was working on.
Imagine that.
And while I was doing it, I listened to the podcast that Lex Friedman hosted that had 2 pro-Palestinians and 2 pro-Israeli state debaters arguing, even shouting at each other at times.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did that go?
Well, what's interesting and why I bring them up is that one of the things that gets debated in these situations is which facts are important and relevant and which are not. And I talked about the complexity of this earlier. One of the other things is that certain facts can be argued to supersede other facts. Let me give you an example. Let's say that at one point in time, you had a belief that was very abhorrent. But then time passes and you realize that your belief is abhorrent and you come to abhor the belief too. Now, there are 2 things that matter here. First, if I'm trying to win an argument, which is what typically happens in these situations, what I would do is I would leave out the context of the fact that you woke up, and I would quote you at the earlier stage when you made the statement and say, see what a bad person Bill was. He actually said the following thing, and I quote. And everything I just said is accurate. It's a fact.
It's a fact, but it's not current understanding.
Right. Things have evolved and developed.
Things have changed.
Okay. But then let's say that the reason that you've had this turnaround is that now you're in the dock. You've been charged with something, and this thing makes you particularly culpable for a behavior that you did that has got you in trouble. And so your original quote now becomes valid once again. It's not invalid, right? Because why are you saying differently now? You might have a political reason to say differently. You might have, in your case, a reason to get out of the dock, to try to escape punishment. There's any number of motives that could show up that matter.
Sure, I see.
So in the endless complexity of trying to figure out this issue is who said what, when, and why they said it. And then if they change their position, who said what, when, and why they said it. And then can you find enough examples of who said what, when, and why they said it versus the other side of who said what, when, and why they said it. And the idea that any one human being, including you, can do enough research that you decisively know exactly how this should all play out is a level of hubris that is anti-human.
Oh, yeah, completely.
It doesn't respect your own humanity, and it will disregard the humanity of others. And I've already seen this. I've already experienced it. I've already been shouted at over this. And it scares me. It makes me sad.
I feel such trepidation about AI for this reason. If AI, for example, were to go back and download everything about me from when I began to talk, they would find out,
Oh my God.
right? Just theoretically, right?
I have said so many stupid things in my youth, and I just grew up last week.
Right?
Okay. I mean, yes. So this is not the way to analyze this situation. I'm just persuaded that it doesn't get us to peace, that method only has at its heart escalation.
Yep. I mean, it's great for fireworks show if you want that, if you're trying to get
and that's all over the
attention.
media, and everybody's sucking that up all day long, and their adrenaline's tweaked, and they're adrenaline junkies, and they love the fear, and they can't shut it off, right?
Yeah.
They get a little dopamine rush, maybe. I don't know what the chemical reaction stuff all is here. I'm going to propose a different chemical reaction before we're done, but I'm struck by the fact that these men who were experts spent a great deal of their time. This was a 4+ hour podcast. I did not finish, true confession. I only did about 2.5 of it. It was overwhelming, just that one podcast. So, I had this thought like, oh, I'm going to listen to this and I'm really going to get up the arc, right? I'm going to climb up that spot. I'm going to get to the point where I really know something. And of course, it was done in Kruger. It was that trap, right? You get up there, all of a sudden you look down and go, crap, there's so much more to know. Right. And I can't even tell whether their truth claims between each other are exactly the right ones. And so I'm suggesting that that's probably not the best way to read and understand what's happening in front of us right now. You should instead understand, and it would be helpful for everyone involved. Peace begins to be available when everyone understands, wait a minute, this desire didn't come from me. I didn't originate this in myself. I got it from somewhere. Why am I carrying around this desire? And you can apply this principle to your entire life.
Oh, heck
you can
yeah.
apply this principle every single time you find yourself in conflict. Why am I so worked up right now? What is it that put me in this position? Or if you just want to be more colloquial about it, you can say, how's that working out for me?
Yep. There we go. Dr. Phil, right?
Yeah. Number three. I have a spiritual view of the world, which is why I was moved to do this show. I'm a libertarian who has a spiritual view of this world. I believe that there are spirits moving. Now, what do I mean by that? You might have a hard time following that and think, man, that's just kooky. But what I mean by that is that there are concepts, there are ideas, there are beliefs, there are values that are held by people which may or may not be true. They may be in material reality, they may actually even be false. But the belief in those ideas can be strong enough that they become animated. And in their animation, they become real. They have properties and abilities to, they actually borrow or steal the hands of real human beings who then use them in bad ways. So the result of the beliefs on the sides in this particular equation and of the people who are picking sides in this equation is commonly that there is discord. And the discord has escalated to destruction and death. And the destruction and death are real. So when you say something is possessed by a spirit, what you mean is that there is an errant view of the world that is held so closely, believed so passionately, that idea has taken over. It has inhabited a body. That is what I would call demon possession. It is an errant concept that has inhabited the mind and then moves out in destructive manner in our real material world where it's capable of harming one another.
So we're not talking about birds aren't real here. We're talking about, well, I'll just name them: religion, politics, and money, right? We're talking about belief systems that are so internal to us that we may have even forgotten that it's something we chose to believe.
So I'm an anti-war libertarian, which to me is redundant. And so I recognize that there is a need for the state to reify itself. What is reification? Reification means it becomes personified. It becomes an actor as a person. And we speak of our government as if it is a conscious actor. And this conscious actor, though, is an abstraction. It's a collection of individuals who are all morally responsible for their own individual behaviors. And when they move out into the world and they do what they do, if they do it as the hands and feet of the machine, of the Borg, of the state, and they give up their individuality in these cases, their normal day-to-day moral code, the way that they practice respect for their neighbors, the way that they have care and concern for those around them, particularly those that they love, when they give those things up and instead submit themselves to this higher power, they become a bit possessed. Their spirit, the spirit of their ideas, gets carried out in destruction. Now, I'll be very blunt. The state needs people to die. It needs to do violent acts to prove it's real. That's how they get you to pay your taxes. That's how they get other people to submit to their will. That's the game. It's force. It's violence. There is a cult attached to this, the cult of the omnipotent state. And we've discussed in the past with Colin Kaepernick and so forth, the idea that worship was even required, fealty to it was even socially required. And how dare you would even question the loss of life that occurs when one of our troops dies, because their blood has to have meaning, and the state feeds on that in almost vampiric fashion. So now there is a cause into which they're called to feed their own children. And I'm saying that the spirit of this, which they didn't actually originate within themselves and their own personal desires, now is manifest in a way that it has to destroy. So as we're recording this, I don't know what's going to happen next, but Israel had attacked an embassy, an Iranian embassy in Syria, and Iran feels the need to respond. The spirit that's attached to that is one of escalation and justification and judgment. And each side's got to continue to save face. They've got to continue. In fact, what's the point of the state if it won't respond? If the state bears the power of the sword, and if they don't respond, what's the point? I just want you to recognize, a lot of people, my late friend David Berglund was campaigning in 1984. Forgive, I'm about to be crass, so you might want to fast forward about 30 seconds. He was campaigning and he ran into a particularly irritating person who wouldn't let him go. He's kind of, doing the circuit and shaking hands in a room. And this guy kept asking him this and that and the other. And he said, I don't know. He said, I'm a libertarian at heart, he finally says. And David, who wanted to extract himself from the conversation, says, when it reaches your balls, give me a call.
There you go.
And walked away.
Perfect.
And I'm bringing that up to say, I am going down to the farthest possible level. I am plumbing the very foundational anchor point of what it is to be a voluntarist. To say that it matters what you do and what you believe as an individual in a Nuremberg-esque type setting. You are responsible for yourself. And when you let go, when you let fear transport you into something else, when you let go of the fundamental respect you have for your neighbor and you ignore that and you say, instead, I would like to hear their anguish and your cries, that is possession of something else. And here's the funny thing. You didn't originate it. I'm not blaming you, but I would like people to open and see what's actually happening here, because what needs to happen is a pattern of de-escalation, not of constant escalation. So they're not fighting over the land. Neither side did the persons individually originate that desire for the land within themselves. They caught it They imitated it. They inherited it. And this idea has real consequences. It's a spirit that is animated out into the hands and feet and mouths of real people who then do things that they wouldn't do under other sets of circumstances.
Now, you raise an interesting point here about how conflict is fraught with irony. And in this particular conflict, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
there are a set. I have to thank a friend of mine who pointed out he believes that irony is the source of everything in the universe. That it's kind of like the purpose of the whole thing. It's like a fun story that's just full of ironies, and it's a very amusing, satisfying view of the world, because when you start to see it all over the place when someone says that. But in this particular case, I want to, with all due gravity, point out three things about the ironies of conflict.
Which, by the way, for the average bear here, irony is going to exist whether or not you perceive it. So if you don't see the irony, somebody else probably does, and you can ask them to explain it to you.
Yeah, well, and in fact, I could put a fourth thing on this, and I'll say it up front. It's commonly the case that the sides involved, which is who we're going to talk about here, is the sides, don't see themselves this way.
It's only the people
it's only the people outside of it that can see this. The ability to recognize the three things I just said allow you to pull up and see from a high level view. Oh, wait a minute. There's some ironies at work here. Let's hit them. First, the sides tend to mirror each other, tending towards escalation. Now, this is a concept called mimetic rivalry. This is where their desires conflict. And as they begin to fight each other, they forget more and more about the thing that they're fighting over and become more and more obsessed with the other. And they start using and engaging in tactics that are as bad. They're justified by the other side for how bad they are. And they're one-upped because they got to win.
Right.
And so their character gets modified by the rivalry such that they become more and more like the very thing that they say they abhor. And only people that cannot see this are the people in the conflict themselves. A blindness shows up in these situations so that only people outside of it can possibly understand. So I don't know if you've ever been involved. This has happened to me. What I'm about to describe, I've actually done this. Okay. So I've been in a situation where I want everyone to be as upset as I am with the bad guy. And I could even explain to you at great length all the things that the bad guy did. I had an experience in my life where I was really set on this and wounded and hurt, extra wounded and hurt, that other people hadn't seen what I saw and taken up offense on my behalf.
No, I can't possibly think of a situation occurring like that ever. Can you?
No, I'm saying it happened in your
own very unique life.
Right. And so what happened is, and then, what ended up happening in this particular situation that I'm thinking of is that we had another couple that my wife and I knew who came back to me later and said, "Oh, now forget that. I just want to point one thing out for the purpose of this discussion. And that was a tremendous sense of joy that I felt that, ho, we've been understood. Someone else sees that the other person was bad too. And that justified me. Okay, why am I so concerned about that? Because I'm blind. The other people in the conflict are looking at it and go, man, these two guys are a lot alike, right? In the way that they're handling things.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a big admission on my part. I'm telling you, I was wrong. I'm telling you that, and that doesn't mean I believe that the other party was justified to this day, by the way. I just want to be clear. But I judged. And I responded. And I wanted other people to see it. So I'm saying that this tends to escalate and people become like each other. They don't go towards love in these situations. You know what I'm saying? Okay. And this is the second one, very closely related to the first. They tend to do the exact same things they claim to hate about the other side. And this, my friends, is what we call hypocrisy. And you'll find when you get into a real row, when you get into a real dispute, it's very hard to hold on to your integrity in this situation and do something that an innocent bystander would look at and say, well, that was completely justified. It's hard, especially if it's an act of vengeance. It's planned, it's rehearsed, it's organized, it's orchestrated. And then you want people to side with you. People look at you kind of funny and go, whoa, I'm not sure I want to get into this mess. And they're right to kind of stand back. Hard for the people involved to see it. They don't understand that they're caught up in the spiral of mimetic rivalry. They don't understand that they're being hypocritical. They can't see it. They're blind.
Yep.
Third thing. We talked about this with Jerry in the episode about the eye, parable of the eye. The sides lose sight of the goal. They came in all principled. I was for this. This is why I got involved in the fight. I'm going to advance this wondrous cause. My virtue's intact because I'm trying to bring about the glorious revolution. My cause is the just and good and pure and right one. And they become obsessed instead with schadenfreude, which is a great word. We don't have it in our language, so we had to borrow it. Schadenfreude is a German word. It means pleasure at someone else's misfortune. They want schadenfreude and or punishment. Those are the things that they tend to want. The weeping and lamentation of the other side's widows.
You've just described the national elections here.
This goes on all over our political life. But sometimes, as I said, the spirit gets really ugly and real people die.
Yeah.
Property and happiness are destroyed.
All for schadenfreude.
So those are three ironies that fall out of conflict on a routine basis, and they can be seen here. So consider that a bonus point, if you will. So we got 4 points now, about which I'm really confident.
I find no fault with any of them, although I will observe that it's more difficult to be the one who observes the irony rather than one who's in the fight. You with me?
So I figured these 4 things out about 6 weeks ago. And then I went through another revolution inside my own head. When the fight starts, there's each side is just like I was in the example I gave you a few minutes ago. Mm-hmm. They want to hear your voice on their side, and they perceive the voice that does not agree, that does not say, I too will pick up a stone. Let's go there for a second. You know, in that story where Jesus says, him without sin, pick up the stone, throw the first one.
Yep.
And no one does. What mobs need, what people in politics, which is a mob behavior, need is for other people to pick up the stone. That validates they're holding the stone. And when they have to carry Jerry Boyer's, in our previous episode about the parable of the eye, to carry that metaphor one step further, they actually feel like if you don't pick up a stone, you're saying in accusatory fashion, you're evil, you're bad, you're wrong. And that may be what people choose to hear from what I have to say today. And so, yes, I expect that people will be hurt by what I'm saying with no intent on my part, that they will not appreciate that I have not picked their side in this, or that I have in some way, they will feel denigrated, even though I've never once said anybody here is a bad person. If you go back to the beginning of this episode as I laid this out, my first point was that they're not fighting over land. My second point, which goes directly to that, is that these desires didn't originate themselves. I am not casting blame here. I want to be clear, but I am exposing the movement of spirits. And this is what the result ends up being. The person that stands up and says, hey, wait a minute, can we try grace? They have committed a scandal. The one thing that the mobs can agree on is that that's not acceptable.
Right.
That's something that draws the ire of both sides. Grace itself is a scandal.
So we have bipolarity. It's a common thing these days. And by taking any position other than the accepted two, you're creating a scandal. How dare you?
Particularly if you're saying, I don't want to pick up a stone. I don't want to join in.
Yes, particularly if you refuse to be.
If you say, I don't want to do that, then that is the type of thing that gets you stoned. Like, you're the one that didn't pick it up, so you have to be stoned.
That's why I suggested that having that view, understanding the irony, taking a step back and looking at it without a bipolar point of view is the hardest part, because you're exposed.
Yes.
And often you're exposed by standing in the middle of two sides who will stone you, not just one.
Right. So there's this nobility that comes along in the term justice. People speak about the justice and they speak about it in highfalutin tones, when what they're really saying is punishment instead of love and mercy.
Right.
They want punishment to occur. They want to get the last stroke in. They want to get the last bomb. They want to get the final blow. They want it to be decisive and painful. And they believe that they can gain submission and maybe even repentance out of this act. And if not absolute destruction, maybe they don't care about repentance. In some cases, they just want destruction. But this is what they label justice, that they wrap up in a nice package. But inside of that package is schadenfreude and punishment. It has a bow on the outside that says everybody has been made whole, but that's not what's inside the package. And I'm saying that schadenfreude is phony justice. It's not real. Gandhi may uttered the phrase about the man that there's one man with one eye in the kingdom, right? Because it's eye for an eye. We're going to end up taking everybody's eye out, right? I don't remember how the exact quote goes.
Yeah.
But I want, what he's getting at there is that there has to be a moment when someone says, whoa, enough. So stone was thrown at me, but I am not going to pick up a stone and throw back. And that is scandalous. And as I said, it goes completely against the cause of the state, the purpose or organization or whatever you want to say for the state. The state bears the sword. If it stops using the sword, what good is it? There is nothing, there's no conferred advantage by the state. Anything you can think of that you want to achieve in life can be done without the state. Anything. We don't need the big government we have. We don't need it, period. Anything you can think of could be done by voluntary human action. The reason we have it is that we're scared, we're in fear that if it doesn't use the sword on the people who don't do what they're supposed to do, who don't do as we like, who don't do our values, they won't do the right thing. And if they don't do the right thing, we're all going to hell. So we got to make them do the right thing. And sooner or later, that arrives in conflict. And sometimes that conflict gets destructive and even kills people. It's all fruit of the same tree, Bill.
Well, yeah, so we can lament the state of our values right now that have allowed our states around the world to run things the way that they are. If there's any sort of, way to fix that, of course, it can only be done one-to-one. As we improve way down here at the grassroots, it will trickle upwards toward the state. Well, whatever's left of it.
To me, I'm sorry, people need Jesus,
right? I mean,
that's kind of, we've been running this theme through all the episodes we've done on the Girardian thing, right? This cup of communion is the cup of blood, and it's God Himself saying, if you're going to destroy somebody, destroy me. Destroy me.
And the instructions are real simple. 3 words: love one another.
Love one another.
What could be easier than that?
Well, it's very hard. As you're seeing, this is very, very difficult to lay down that stone and start to love. That's hard. That's the hard part. Okay. So some grace points to wrap this up, because we like to provide practical advice for people to take with. I just want to say, I hope that people can see that their vision has been opened up here. Even if we just got one person today, success. Okay. And if this is touching you or pricking at you, maybe it needed to, I don't know. but I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. I confess to something I did wrong that's of this same type during the course of this episode. Now, first grace point, I got 3 of them. If the 2-state solution was delivered, it wouldn't deliver bliss. It wouldn't even achieve satisfaction. Tomorrow, people would wake up with a new problem. I'm not saying that that might be a better solution. I'm not commentating on that at all. Whatever your grand plan for this region is, if it's not this, if you have another plan, whatever that is, there's no waking up tomorrow with the sun coming out and everything being rainbows and lollipops and unicorns. That's not how life works. And so this goes all the way back to our original point that nobody's fighting over the land, because getting the land won't scratch the itch. 2, I'm going to be honest about grace here right now, in a forthright way I have never, ever said on this show. And that is that grace is imaginary. What do I mean by that? Well, I believe in the power of imagination. Not everything is a scientific law. Not everything is cause and effect. What we have as humans is the ability to see something better for other people. And that ability to see something better can be for a loved one. It could be for a neighbor or a stranger. And here's the revolutionary concept. It could even be for an enemy. To see something better in another person, to see a better future, a better hope. That's what forgiveness is. That ability to see that better future and hope. Finally, Bill, I said I wanted to describe a different hormonal reaction.
Yeah.
There's a scientist out there, an economist / scientist, calls himself the vampire economist because he does these blood draws, checks people's hormone levels under certain settings and circumstances, and has learned a whole lot. His name is Paul Zak, and I hope to bring him on the program at a future date. Paul wrote a book called The Moral Molecule. And in it, he lays out that there's a pattern or a path. So oxytocin was thought of until roughly the 1990s as strictly a hormone that showed up in nursing mothers. Our science on this is very modern and new. And what we know a few things about oxytocin. We know that it shows up for short bursts of time. It doesn't last very long. It comes and it goes.
Yeah.
It has a lot of other hormones that are antagonists to it that like suppress it, that cause it to go away. One of those hormones, just to pick an example, and I'm not saying anything negative here, I want to be very clear, is testosterone. So testosterone tends to be the more testosterone a person has, the more it's surging through them, the less susceptible they tend to be to things like frauds and cons. We have the term con because it's short for confidence. What a confidence person does, confidence man, con woman, what they do is they get you to side with them, to feel them, to empathize with them. And oxytocin kicks into gear and you become vulnerable to doing an act of kindness, of sharing, of decency, of sacrifice. It becomes natural to you because you have empathy. But where did the empathy come from? Well, the confidence people have understood this forever. It came from building trust. So if you're following me closely here, Paul Zak outlines it incredibly well in the book. He even tells a story of when he was conned himself as a kid, working at a gas station. He opens the book with it. Putting trust in another person causes their empathy levels to rise. Empathy is in the body is exhibited as an increase in oxytocin. It's a state of vulnerability and openness. We tend to think, we do this with the drug war, we do this with a whole host of things, that if we shame, if we belittle, if we mock, if we punish, if we excoriate, if we censor, if we do these things, that somehow or other we will obtain conviction. I grew up in a denomination where they invoked fear to get it.
I know, yeah.
But trust has a unique power that we rarely deploy. I don't know how to create it in this situation. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm just a man sitting here sharing a deeper look at how to see the situation, but I am not prescribing to either side how they fix it. But I'm relatively certain that fixing any situation of conflict requires someone to say, I won't pick up the stone, and I want to start to put trust in you because I see something better in you.